The specialist wasn't the monstrous figure he expected. She was a woman barely older than him, but with eyes that were chillingly hollow, the mark of someone who had spent too long peering into darknesses most would shy away from. Her name, Dr. Miller, was provided with clinical precision, devoid of any military rank. He expected probes, drugs that laid his mind bare, or the high-tech equivalent of medieval torture. Instead, there was just conversation. They sat in a sterile room, his intimidating form a grotesque contrast to her unremarkable appearance. She asked questions, deceptively simple at first, about his past, his memories, and his thoughts on the Lazarus Resurrection Project. He tensed, waiting for the twist, the subtle accusation designed to trip him into a confession. But it never came. As their sessions turned into a strange parody of therapy, he began to understand her method. Dr. Miller wasn't after a forced confession, but a manufactured one. She sought to twist his defiance into doubt, to make him question whether his actions resulted from a fractured psyche and not a calculated act of rebellion. It was a horrifyingly efficient way of stripping away his martyrdom, turning his existence into a clinical study, not a rallying cry. Worse yet was the change within himself. The endless monotony of the academy, the forced isolation, and these unsettling sessions. They gnawed at his resolve. The Lazarus Project warped more than just flesh. It devoured memories and gnawed at sanity, each death eroding a piece of the man he once was. Dr. Miller, with chilling patience, poked at those cracks. Her words were scalpels cutting into his already fractured psyche. He began to dream of the battlefield then, not the terror and the pain itself, but the brutal simplicity of it. Life and death held a clarity his current existence cruelly lacked. In action, horrifying as it was, he didn't have to endlessly question his own atrocious nature. Then came the change in tactics, a cruel twist he should have foreseen. Dr. Miller vanished, replaced by figures hauntingly familiar. They weren't his family, as those bonds were lost to him long ago. No, they turned out to be fellow soldiers, not the Phoenix Squad's inhuman veterans. No, these were broken and hollow-eyed new recruits who had yet to undergo the Phoenix Project protocol. Those who stared at him with a mix of terror and awe, the next generation fated to walk the path he had unwillingly pioneered. The message was brutally clear. These were his replacements, the future of the Federation's war machine. They showed his legacy, not of heroic resistance, as he had desperately hoped, but of an ever-expanding cycle of dehumanization. His defiance, Dr. Miller implied, had merely fueled the machine he loathed. Sleep became a nightmare. Dr. Miller's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the endless questions from the new recruits who saw their undying future reflected in his scarred flesh. One morning he awoke to the familiar sight of his own mangled body twisting back into shape, and the realization shattered what was left of his resolve. He asked to see Dr. Miller, the hollow victory tasting bitter on his tongue. He was a monster. That much was undeniable. But monsters, as his defiance had proven, could be shaped, and the Federation was sculpting him into a weapon they could truly be proud of. His capitulation wasn't the clean, final defeat Dr. Miller expected. It was jagged, hesitant, the broken remnants of his humanity clinging stubbornly to life. He confessed to the fractures in his mind, to the growing instability that mirrored the frightfulness of his physical form. And Dr. Miller noticed with chilling satisfaction, he didn't speak of rebellion, but of simple, desperate self-preservation. They molded him then, not with serums or crude torture, but with a terrifying form of brutalized efficiency. Combat simulations replaced discussions. The Dethilian cadets, once objects of curiosity or fear, became students in exercises that blurred the line between demonstration and live-fire scenarios. The Lazarus Project wasn't just about resurrection, but endless forced adaptation. He learned to anticipate the young aliens' tactics and honed his powerful form into a weapon against their strengths. Each simulated death, each unnatural resurrection, made him less a soldier and more a force of nature unleashed upon the training grounds. He became less a warning and more a twisted promise for the Federation's enemies. Dr. Miller haunted the edges of his existence, analyzing his performance and the chilling degradation of everything human about him. His words, when he used them, were clipped and functional. The haunted, defiant spark in his eyes was replaced with a hunter's cold focus. He was becoming, with horrifying efficiency, the perfect weapon the Federation had always desired, devoid of the internal conflict that had made him dangerously unpredictable. Yet, a kernel of defiance stubbornly clung to life deep within him. It manifested not in grand acts of rebellion, but in tiny, almost invisible ways. A feigned clumsiness during a simulation that allowed a cadet to score a hit, a fleeting hesitation when ordered to inflict what should have been a simulated lethal injury. He wasn't fighting for the man he was. That battle was lost. Instead, he fought for the memory of him. Each tiny act of defiance was a way of clawing back a pathetic testament to a humanity he couldn't fully reclaim, but refused to let them entirely erase. News of his transformation rippled back to the Federation. His handlers praised his newfound ruthlessness, Dr. Miller subtly feeding their assessment. Once hidden until the theatrical moment of reveal, his vicious form became his uniform, paraded with grotesque pride. He was shipped off the Academy world as not some dark stain on their perfect image, but their horrifying new export. His destination wasn't the front lines as he expected, but a new military facility shrouded in secrecy. Recruits, both human and, shockingly, a contingent of young Dithilians, were herded in. His very existence, once the stuff of myth, was now a blueprint. Dr. Miller, with her chillingly dispassionate gaze, unveiled their true purpose. He wasn't merely a weapon, but an archetype to be replicated. The Federation craved a deadly and utterly unquestioningly loyal army of his kind. His defiance, so carefully crushed, had become a horrifying catalyst for something far worse than anyone could have imagined. The war had not just created a monster, it had set the stage for their mass production. He looked upon the new recruits with eyes now devoid of reflection. There was a subtle comfort in the role they had manufactured for him. It replaced agonizing doubt with the brutal simplicity of purpose. He was the template, the blueprint, and his existence now revolved around twisting these young human men and women, and shockingly, even the young Dithilians whose alien genetic makeup made it so they were most unlikely to survive the procedure. The process was relentless and devoid of false heroism. There were no speeches about valor, no promises of glorious victories. He showed them, again and again, the harsh reality of the Lazarus Resurrection Project, the pain of death, the agony of unnatural rebirth, and the insidious way their minds warped to accommodate this monstrous cycle. The Dithilians, initially resistant to the idea of forced resurrection, became a grim fascination for him. Their physiology was different, multiple hearts and redundant systems, which lent itself to an even more terrifying durability under the protocol's influence. Dr. Miller observed his interactions with these aliens with chilling curiosity, dissecting his training methods and any lingering hesitation he might display. Initially, he crushed such hesitation ruthlessly. Part of him, the still human part, longed to spare these recruits the horrors he embodied. But that same part of him understood that weakness and pity were the cracks the Federation would exploit if they sensed defiance. To protect them in a twisted yet almost fatherly way meant hardening their bodies and minds to the reality of what they were about to become. Yet, he began subtly altering the training regimen. He focused relentlessly on survival, emphasizing ways to mitigate damage over recklessly aggressive tactics. His goal, unvoiced but housed in his own fractured mind, was to create monsters who didn't seek battlefield glory, but a grim, enduring existence. Monsters who would become so hard to kill, so terrifying in their relentlessness, that their enemies might falter before the Federation unleashed these undead weapons of last resort against them. His legacy was taking on an unexpected shape. The recruits under his tutelage were efficient, brutal, and terrifyingly difficult to eliminate permanently. But they lacked the fanatical zeal his superiors desperately craved. He saw it in their eyes, the same haunted darkness that flickered within his own. They were survivors, not conquerors. Dr. Miller, ever observant, noticed this deviation, but her conclusions, as always, were coldly pragmatic. "Your methods produce results," she acknowledged, disdain barely concealed. His undying students, she implied, were more valuable alive than as martyrs. "The higher-ups desire something more inspiring, and I do plan to deliver," he said, a hint of a smile on his face. The war, meanwhile, continued relentlessly. News of his students spread, whispered at first, then with grudging respect, and finally with outright dread. His existence, the legacy he built with each resurrection, was etching itself into the very mythology of the conflict. His Defiance Squad was beginning to take shape, and the Federation was none the wiser.